And we just had the first 12-month period in which temperatures averaged more than 1.5 Celsius above the pre-industrial times. And then in November last year, temperatures briefly breached 2 Celsius. This is critical because 1.5 to 2 Celsius are the warming levels that could bring the consequences that are extremely difficult for our societies to manage. Each fraction of temperature increase exacerbates destructive weather disasters. And we saw many of those last year, whether it's deadly heat waves, extreme rains, or wildfires. And at the same time, it's worth noting that the global carbon emissions from fossil fuels have risen again in 2023, reaching record levels. The reality is that we have already emitted an excessive amount of CO2, and we are faced with the daunting challenge of addressing hard-to-abate emissions. With approximately around 228 gigatons remaining in our carbon budget to stay within 1.5 Celsius of global warming, and then annual emissions that are now exceeding 40 gigatons, we have a little less than 6 years, to be precise, 5.7 years until the budget is depleted. So what this means, we need rapid action to drastically cut emissions, and we also need in parallel to remove emissions. And in today's webinar, we'll focus on carbon dioxide removal, or CDR for short, which is the acronym you'll hear us using during this session. And here are a few things to know about CDR before we dive deeper into the specific topics. First, all Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, scenarios to stay within 1.5 or to 2 degrees of global warming include significant amount of CDR. In fact, according to IPCC, staying below the warming levels and achieving global net zero by 2050 requires removing up to 10 gigatons from the atmosphere every year. And afterward, and throughout the second half of the century, global emissions must stay net negative, which means removing more CO2 than emitting. And Robert will actually share with us where we are today in terms of the removal numbers. The second thing that is important to keep in mind for the purposes of this webinar is that carbon removal solutions are needed for 3 reasons: to reverse the buildup of historical emissions, to offset the residual emissions that are hard to abate, so emissions from the aviation, cement, and shipping sectors, and to reduce the Earth's emissions from natural feedback loops that are exacerbated by continued global warming. So that could be from forest fires or methane escaping from permafrost. And lastly, the third thing to know about CDR is that there are 2 types of carbon removal: nature-based solutions, which involve conserving, restoring, or better managing ecosystems to remove CO2 from the atmosphere, and durable or engineered carbon removal. And while the focus of this webinar is on durable carbon removal, we need both. We need nature-based and we need durable carbon removal. And for those of you who are new to durable carbon removal, all you need to know for the purpose of this webinar is that durable CDR refers to intentional human action to take CO2 out of the atmosphere and securely store it in places where it won't easily return to the air. And we achieve this by locking carbon away for hundreds to thousands of years in geological formations, deep ocean layers, or certain materials. And Berta will talk about specific durable CDR technologies and some of the key trends that we're seeing. So with this context in mind, I just want to get to the deep dives that we have planned for you today. Let's dive deeper into the state of carbon removal market with our panel of experts. And first up is Robert Hoagland. Robert is a CDR thinker, a writer, a co-founder of CDR.FYI. He manages the Milky Way Climate Transformation Fund and works with Carbon Gap. And Robert will share the latest on the CDR market. Robert, over to you.
Thank you. Glad to be here. I'm glad to see that there's so many participants. So yeah, excitement is growing around this sector for sure. And CDR FYI is a platform that tracks all the transactions in durable CDR, so both purchases and deliveries, but also price and sort of more information about the suppliers to bring more transparency around the sector, so that both purchasers and investors and suppliers can see what's going on and can follow the data. And we can move to the next slide. We've been doing this for a couple of years now, both being able to show the progress live on the website, but also publishing these in-depth reports, year in review that we just published for looking back at the 2023 and saw what happened, and also kind of mid-year in review, but also a lot of other tools and sort of analysis on the cover removal market. And as you can see on these two graphs, this nascent market is showing impressive growth in terms of percentage-wise, where on the left side, you can see the order volume, the cover removal purchases, and this includes offtake agreements where you pay for in the future when you get your deliveries, but also pre-purchases where buyers of cover removal have made an upfront payment to enable this to happen. But it's tons that are delivered over several years, and the delivery side is what's in the ground already, mostly biochar. Carbon futures is a big part of that, but many others as well. Biochar being one of the technologies that was kind of more key ready to start delivering. And as you can see on the purchases, it grew from almost non-existent volumes just a few years ago, showing this kind of 5x per year growth in these early years, from 100,000 to 600,000 tons purchased, and now in 2023, 4.5 million tons. And deliveries are also growing, but not the same speed, which is completely to be expected because the purchases are for future tons. It's new technologies that have only existed in the lab or in the garage. And when someone gets a purchase to do something, it takes several years to build a facility, especially the ones that deliver a lot of cover removal. So deliveries will continue to lag behind for years, but expected to get up to speed with purchases as time goes. Yes, we can move to the next slide. But of course, when we're at this early stage, individual buyers become a very big part of the story. And last year, we saw a very large purchase from Microsoft from two suppliers, the biggest one from a bioenergy carbon capture storage facility in Denmark of 2.6 million tons over several years, but also a large deal of 300,000 tons, I think, from Heirloom, a direct air capture company. And as you can see, one company represents about 60% of the order volume. And if you look at the top 10 companies, it's about 90%. So you can really see how the big buyers of early companies that have the ability to pay might have high profit per emissions and have made a commitment to accelerate this sector and help it grow, really play this kind of outsized role. And that also makes it, of course, difficult to extrapolate growth because it's very dependent on what individual companies are doing and who else is going to get involved. But we know that we have thousands of companies with net zero targets, and they're all going to need carbon removal. Currently, it's just about 0.5% of SBTi target setters, at least, that have purchased durable CDR. So most customers, the very large majority of future customers, have not gotten engaged. So there's a lot of buyers that sort of waiting on the sidelines. You can go to the next one. And an interesting question is if we're on track or not. So if we're talking about these gigaton levels needed by mid-century and even more, if we're also going to start bringing down the CO2 that's already in the atmosphere to reverse the overshoot that's very likely to happen. And then we need to get started very early on. And it's a question I'll talk a little bit more about in a webinar that's coming directly after this one. It's the Open Air Collective's This is CDR series that we'll talk more in depth about last year and this report from CDR FYI, looking into what happened and what's needed. But saying a little bit about if we're on track or not, we can say that we're at least not on track, because if we have this impressive growth in volume continue, then of course we're going to run into very high numbers quickly. Of course, this is going to taper off. We're not going to see a 5x increase of the market every year. And then the question is, how fast would it have to be? And it's difficult to ground it in studies, but there was a very interesting paper from Greg Nemeth and other co-authors in Joule just a few months ago that looked at early technologies and how they scaled. And they determined that in order for CDR to be able to reach this kind of 4 or 5 gigatons by mid-century and more after that, you would need a fast growth in the coming couple of decades. So cumulatively, at least 3 gigatons by 2040 will be needed to reach this. And a key factor here is that the 2020 has become important because if we're not at the scale of removing at least tens of millions of tons by 2030, it's going to be quite difficult to have that kind of growth rate to reach the gigatons level on. So this decade is very important. And although we've seen a very promising influx of buyers and we see very promising growth numbers, the really key is to get more of these bigger buyers to engage. So far, it's just 6 companies that bought more than 100,000 tons. So we need hundreds of those companies. That's a really big key. But we see a lot of initiatives, of course. We have Microsoft, we have Frontier, which collects buyers. I work with Milky Wire, the Climate Transformation Fund, where Spotify and Klarna, others are putting money into our fund, which buys carbon removal at a big scale, but also other climate solutions to help kickstart the industry. So there are a lot of promising signs for sure. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much, Robert. So clearly we're making progress, but more demand is needed to drive the fast growth, and we need to move beyond the small group of first movers to the next round of corporate buyers, which is a perfect segue to Nasim, who leads the carbon dioxide removal sector at the First Movers Coalition of the World Economic Forum. She also leads the carbon market in an innovative initiative at the Center for Nature and Climate. And Nasim will give us insight into CDR buyers or corporate perspective. Over to you, Nasim.
Thanks, Leila. Hi, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here. As Leila mentioned, I lead the carbon removals at the First Movers Coalition. And for those of you that are not familiar with the First Mover Coalition, or FMC as we call it, CDR is one sector of the FMC that leverages the collective purchasing power of companies to send a clear signal to scale up durable CDR technologies that are critical to achieve net zero. And we are pleased to have several biggest buyers of the FMC, of the CDR as members of our community, making around 80% of the current advanced purchases in the CDR market. And today I'm delighted to share some insights of working closely with these first movers, as understanding what efforts have been successful is key to speeding change. So in the FMC, when it comes to growing the membership and when we invite companies to commit to investing in durable CDR technologies, we often face 2 overarching questions. One is, why should we invest in CDR when there are inexpensive and more available nature-based alternatives? And second is, why now? Why not waiting when they are mature and affordable? So basically, for any company to engage in this market, it's imperative that there is a clear case for integrating durable CDR as an essential part of their decarbonization strategy. For some companies, engineered CDR solutions offer greater certainty around delivering on net zero, and for others, it could become a core business opportunity. So whatever rationale they have for investing in CDR, if a company plans on using removal to balance their residual emissions, say by 2050, they can't just wait until 2049 before starting to think about where to get them from. And that means that leadership is essential, because taking a proactive position today gives CDR developers the capacity to ramp up supply and bring down the cost of their removals more quickly. Not to mention there are some co-benefits for some options like biochar or enhanced rock weathering. There are advantages on improving the quality of agriculture or soil, and of course preserving natural ecosystem health. There are existing infrastructure currently used for oil and gas that could be reused and repurposed, and the workers that could be reskilled, basically supporting a just transition. So when the rationale is there and the companies decide to engage in CDR market, the next step will be, of course, to first securing the budget and then deciding on the procurement strategy they want to make the purchase. Next slide, please. So working with the first movers, so far choosing the resources for carbon removals is usually either by setting an internal price on carbon when there is a long-term price per ton of CO2, and it allows the companies basically to have some more certainty around how much they can invest in CDR, and also securing longer-term offtakes. Some of our members like Swiss Re or BCG have adopted this model. There are others like Microsoft, for example, that set a time-bound target either by fixed budget or quantity of removal. And then when the budget is sourced, in the next slide, please, there are basically 3 archetype models how to do the offtake contracts. The first one is direct deal making, when there's like direct negotiation with removal developers, but it needs deep in-house knowledge and capacity to conduct due diligence, for example, price negotiation, etc. But at the same time, it avoids like the fees for intermediaries. It's usually more suitable for large companies with significant budget and capacity. And Microsoft, again, is a good example of adapting this model. The second is buyer's club model. Some of our members, like, for example, NextGen and Frontier, work on this model. So they collect several buyers, enter a signal contract. So this way the risk are shared, and it needs usually less internal effort to make the deal, and it will be easier to monitor and control the project development. The last one is over-the-counter purchase. So companies do one-off purchases via marketplaces like Patch, Carbon Future, etc. And it usually is faster, is more straightforward. A lot of the effort is usually work done by the marketplace platform. And often it's could be used as a complementary to their longer-term contracts. Next slide, please. So for corporates, understanding why CDR, how to get involved, how to secure the budget, basically what it means, the next step or the next scale to really get to the 5 to 15 tons gigatons of scale that we're talking about. It calls for really immediate action from companies. That's why the role of initiatives like first movers and such is important to create that demand signal that basically develops or accelerates the developments or commercialization of these technologies. And the more developed they are, the sooner the price will fall. That said, it's not only on corporates. Also, it calls for huge corporate action to evolve or make the evolution of CDR market towards wider corporate adaptation. There is a huge need for constructive ecosystem collaboration, for developed infrastructure and harmonize standards and guidelines. And all these elements need to be supported by strong policy support. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nassim, for both making the case for investing in CDR today and also documenting how to just really tackle some of the key issues, like how to secure internal financing and how to access market. On the next slide, I think you're also sharing the link to the best practices guide, which includes interviews with 8 different members from the First Movers Coalition and a number of implementation partners. So everyone do take a look at that. One thing that you mentioned, which is a key aspect of the enabling environment, is actually government policy. And that's a great intro to Sebastian Meinhardt, who is a CDR policy expert, senior policy advisor here at Carbon Future, as well as the chair of the DVNE, the EU's first national CDR association. And he's also the founding director of the US Biochar Coalition. So Sebastian will provide an update on the latest developments in the CDR policy in the US and Europe. Over to you, Sebastian.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I hope that I can build on a lot of the things that Nasim said and really show the other side of where we can build significant demand and potentially much larger demand than we could probably ever build from the voluntary carbon market, which is government. So yeah, I'll first talk about the EU. And in the EU, the punchline is that the EU is on track to become the global leader in CDR policy. Some of you will have followed this morning was a big moment for CDR. The CSCF, the Carbon Removal Certification Framework, which for me is arguably one of the most important, if not the most important piece of CDR legislation out there, was the trilogue, the final meeting ended, and we have now a final version. And that could quickly become the gold standard in Europe, but also beyond for what good carbon removal looks like and for how to certify it. But again, we can go into more details later. And other things that happened this month, there was a significant progress on the Green Claims Directive, which, as it says in the name, kind of manages environmental claims for companies. But also we had the communication around the 2040 targets and the industrial carbon management strategy. All of this in just a couple of weeks, which shows the ambition that Europe currently has, especially prior to the election in June, to really get a lot of stuff done and position itself really strongly when it comes to climate policy and also CDR. Next slide, please. A key element that also excites me is that the 2 most influential countries in Europe and the 2 biggest economies, France and Germany, are moving. We've got trade associations forming in both. In France, the AFEN, I know that some of the founders, shout out to them on the webinar, is going to launch in April. In Germany, the DVNE, as already mentioned, was launched last year. And that is crucial to mobilize the sector and also policymakers in these 2 countries. And in Germany, we also see, for example, we've got 1.3 billion on the table for CCS, of which 280 million are also for DAX. So there's quite a lot of support already and much more is going to come. And I'm very excited about the 2 biggest countries moving because that will leverage these economies, but also really will get Europe as a whole to move. Next slide, please. In the US, it's a much more complex picture. And I think the punchline is that at federal level, progress is stalling. We had incredible achievements from the bipartisan infrastructure law in 2021 and the IRA in 2022. And a lot of that we still see today because that was literally hundreds of billions put into the green transition. But other very promising bills like the Farm Bill is delayed. We've got the CREST and the CREATE Act, 2 bipartisan bills, which are kind of on ice. We've got a democratic bill, the CDRLA, which is fantastic, which is not going to move anywhere. So because of the divided Congress, because of the constant government shutdown threats, and because of the elections that are coming up, it's just federally, there's not a lot moving. Next slide. But it's not just bleak, because at the department level, there's a lot happening, both at the Department of Energy, but also at the Department of Agriculture. And this, some of this is more well known, but I'll cover it. But some of this is actually not very well known, especially the USDA work. They've got what is called the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and they have so-called codes of practice, which both, carbon amendments, conservation practices, these are codes set at federal level that are then adopted by states and even by counties. And whenever a farmer adopts those practices, they get paid. And so this is a great way, as you can see here, for both biochar carbon removal and enhanced rock weathering, to essentially open up the markets for these approaches, create adoption without actually any wording around carbon removal. So this is something that's really exciting and quite promising for the next couple of years, and we can move through even in these times. And the second one, more well known, is the carbon negative shot. The DOE is doing amazing work. The DAC hubs, 3.5 billion, of which 1.2 have already been assigned. The CDR pilot purchase price is the first proper public procurement in the world, 35 million. The first winners of phase 1 will be announced this month. And then just last week, they announced the pilot scale testing, which is 100 million over the next 12 months, awarded to a bunch of CDR methods. So this is really promising work that's happening in the States. Next slide, please. And moving forward, where advocacy will be needed. First and foremost, tech openness. A lot of you have already, I'm sure, signed on to the letter that 350 companies signed in December, calling for tech openness in the CSCF. The CSCF ended up being tech open. So, that was one of the contributing factors, but clearly it worked. And we need to keep all our options open. So tech openness will continue to be really, really important. We'll need dedicated and separate CDR targets. I know that Robert with Carbon Gap did some great work about why that is so important. And a lot of that is actually happening right now, both in Europe for 2040 and in Germany, for example, as well. So we need advocacy around that. And the final one, often not mentioned, is allowing foreign offsets. Unfortunately, we build these borders around policy, around anything that tax dollars are spent on, and that is excluding CDR from happening where it's probably cheapest and most effective, which are tropical regions of the world. So this will be a major focus of policy to make sure that that is also open. But yeah, that's all from me. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Sebastian, both sharing some of the key policy developments, and I know we have a few questions related to that, but also highlighting that policy plays such an important role in closing the gap between the current CDR rate and also the target that we have for 2050. With that, we'll move to the final quick deep dive before the Q&A, and that is by Berta Moya, an environmental engineer and an expert also in environmental solutions at Carbon Future. Berta leads our Catalyst program, which connects these emerging frontier CDR technologies with carbon market. And we've asked Berta to provide a brief overview of durable CDR technology, specifically where each is today, what's next, and also to talk about some of the other relevant innovations in the CDR industry, especially related to integrity. So Berta, over to you for a few minutes of the overview, then we will go to the questions.
Great, thank you so much, Leila. So yes, I will be focusing on the CDR technologies. Unfortunately, won't have time to go into much detail, but I'll give a brief overview. So if we go to the next slide. So this first banner shows the CDR approaches that exist to date and that are being proposed. And as you can see, there's a wide range of durable carbon removal approaches being proposed. Some are land-based, some ocean-based, some using minerals as feedstock, other using biomass as feedstock. Not all of them have reached the same stage in the CDR market so far, as we can see from the diagrams below, which come from the CDR FYI report. So thank you very much, Robert and team. And as we can see, there's a huge difference between the purchases being made today, so in green on the left, and the credits delivered in blue on the right, as Robert also mentioned. So the pre-purchases that we see are absolutely essential to enable companies to optimize and develop their technologies, run pilots, and scale as well. And in the pre-purchases, direct air capture, so DACs, and BECCS, bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, are absolutely leading the sales of CDR credits and are steadily developing and maturing their technologies, but not quite yet at the large-scale deployment stage. On the other side, we have biochar carbon removal that is representing 90% of the credits delivered to date. And really what enables this is the fact that the technology for biochar production is readily available, and there are clear and established methodologies and certification pathways for biochar carbon removal. What will need to happen to move over from pre-purchases over to the delivery of credits will require developing a series of systems and infrastructures. And some of the key breakthroughs that will need to come through are around the systems that will enable the actual credit delivery and transparency. So if we move over to the next slide, some of the key breakthroughs I will be talking about in a brief overview here. So funding, of course, is the #1 requirement to unlock scaling of the CDR sector. And luckily, this year has been a great one. Again, according to CDR FYI, CDR has attracted over almost $600 million investment, despite an overall downturn in climate tech investments. And what is actually really encouraging to see overall in the CDR sector is that spirit of collaboration is really developing and establishing itself. Key players are recognizing that the fastest way to reach clarity and create consensus is by working together. And to be able to deliver credits, the first key stage is having clear monitoring, reporting, and verification requirements. And a great example of collaboration here is with enhanced weathering, where we see a not-for-profit, Cascade Climate, that was recently started a scientific consensus building effort, bringing together leading scientists in the sector to align on MRV systems and requirements, and this will culminate in the publication of the first enhanced weathering community standard in the coming months. Then going beyond MRV, it is absolutely crucial to also establish rigorous project due diligence criteria and guidelines to guarantee that we have high quality CDR projects. And one of the key things that is surrounding CDR approaches that use biomass is the sustainability of this biomass sourcing. Will be a key evaluation criterion for these type of CDR CDR approaches. And Carbon Direct this year, for instance, released the first guidelines for biomass-based carbon removal deployment with inputs from a wide range of industry stakeholders. And another trend that we're seeing is that we're also seeing the establishment of independent certification and verification systems. Projects are moving away from in-house methodologies and MRV systems towards the adoption of third-party verification and certification, which opens up great opportunities for innovation, which actually leads me to the next slide. So a carbon removal credit is only as trustworthy as the data that is behind it, which is why we really need robust and impartial data infrastructures to build trust and hence drive growth in the market. This means that large sets of data need to be recorded, shared, and audited to be able to generate trustworthy credits. And digitizing and automating MRV flows is really a great opportunity to streamline all these processes and provide the transparency that the market needs. And here I've put an example that illustrates this. And it's a recent partnership that was announced between Puro, so Standard, Pyreg and Syncraft, who are pyrolysis equipment manufacturers. So in the case of biochar, carbon removal, and then Carbon Future as an MRV provider. And this is really putting DMRV, so digital monitoring, reporting, and verification into practice, establishing an industry ecosystem to ensure full transparency on every step of the carbon removal process. And this specific initiative combines real-time IoT data with an existing standard and DMRV. And I really think this kind of approach and collaboration will need to become the new norm to be able to scale up at the speed that is required in the CDR market to meet the challenge ahead. So yeah, this has only been a brief overview. Yeah, I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Berta. What a great way to end at least this segment and talk about the kind of collective action or collaboration. Thank you also for quick update on some of the key developments with CDR technologies, but also underscoring the importance of having this trust infrastructure for the market to scale. So we'll do a couple of things now, just really building on the questions that were already submitted and also the questions that are coming in. We'll tackle a couple of key topics that we teed up in this discussion. So we'll start first with with demand. And I'll turn over to Robert first. What does buy side momentum look like for 2024? How many new entrants do you expect to see buying durable carbon removal credits? And then maybe Nassim, if you can also comment on what you're seeing, and if you can talk about the participation of hard to abate sectors that came up in the Q&A. Robert.
So, I mean, we're seeing a lot of companies being more interested in it, and that kind of growth in buyers that we have seen year on year will probably continue. But since individual buyers can have such a big impact on the numbers, it's hard to say what it will actually translate into. But there are many with commitments, and I mean, they have made promises that concrete promises, like in the first mover coalition, that will start to buy soon, we would think. But the lack of incentives, I think, is probably the biggest issue. And as long as we don't have that kind of clear incentives, and that there becomes a consensus in different groups, and just an expectation of companies to also start buying CDR, I think that the ones that will do it are these kind of very early movers. We could see in our survey on CDR, FYI, that most buyers were motivated about kickstarting the industry, really kind of well-informed, a little bit more altruistic buyers. And I think that the larger group of buyers that do it because they sort of feel that they have to, they are not going to enter until there are these kind of clear incentives. And that's a big issue.
Sebastian, I see your hand raised, so why don't you go next?
Yeah, I wanted to just build on that, exactly on what Robert was saying. How do we get companies, when would they have to do it? And there's obviously the compliance market that people talk a lot about, but that is, medium to long term, 7, 8, 10 years away from now, depending on the geography. But there's also things that blur the lines between compliance and voluntary. And a good example is environmental claims, green claims. I mean, very soon in Europe, for example, companies that make any kind of environmental claims about either products or even their company will have to back that up with durable carbon removal as certified in the CRCF. And so that's a good example where it's not compliance, but at the same time, companies will want to make those claims, and any companies that want to make those claims will have to buy durable CDR. And so I hope that will also create some of these incentives for companies to move into the market fairly soon.
Yeah, on that point, Nassim, if you want to add anything else in terms of what do you think is holding the next wave of buyers back from making their first purchases in 2024, and what are some of the solutions?
Sure. Yeah, I think echoing what Robert and Sebastian said, the high cost of CDR is probably one of the main barriers, but that's really a result of a few other underlying challenges rather than being a cause in itself. And that's because exactly as they said, yes, there is a nascent nature of the technologies as one, maybe lack of developed MRV standards, but low support from policy, and especially that a lack of recognition and incentives. So unless there is like a strong signals from either regulators or initiatives such as SBTi to recognizing some of the removals efforts towards their net zero, or somehow a way to make them recognized and rewarded, the needle won't change, and we will still stay with first movers that are ambitious, that have budgets to invest in a risky market as it is now. I wanted to add some on the appetite of the hard to abate sector to involve. Yes, I would say that we see like a good sort of interest in the FMC. We have, for example, Emirate Global Aluminium as a member. We have MOL, a shipping company. But outside of the FMC, again, we've seen like a lot of advanced purchases from Airbus, Boeing, others. So I would say that they see it as a way towards their net zero, as mentioned. It still remains a voluntary strategy, but hopefully with more clarity on the regulatory system, we will see even more demand coming from these sectors.
Thanks, Nassim. Robert.
Yeah, just very quickly on cost, I think it's important. We need to bring costs down, but those that are buying very expensive tons at like, $1,000 per ton of direct air capture, they don't care really about the cost per ton. It's more about the kickstarting new things. And those that are deterred by the cost of biochar, for example, at like $150 per ton, we're not gonna solve their problem because we're not gonna see costs drop like way below that. It is in the $100 to $200 per ton that durable CDR is going to cost. So we also need to have an acceptance that this is more expensive, but you don't have to offset all your emissions. So moving away from the kind of old paradigm of we need to be carbon neutral to understanding that some investments covering part of our footprint, at a high cost is the right strategy. I think that's part of the message we need to push.
Thank you for coming back to the cost topic and helping just with the understanding of the different motivations and different barriers. I want to come back to the policy discussion. First, Sebastian, as you mentioned early this morning, the European institutions held their final trilogue meeting on the CRCF, agreeing on the final text of what could become the world's, as you said, gold standard for carbon removal certification. Can you share what does this decision on CRCF mean for carbon removal in Europe and beyond? And then I have a couple of additional questions that have come up related to the policy in Europe.
Yeah, and I really recommend, as Zoe was just shared, we wrote an article about this in the morning, which provides much more context than I can give in a short answer now. So feel free to check it out. But why is the CRCF important, the carbon removal certification framework? I would say three quick things for people to understand the importance of it. The first one is it's a missing building block in EU climate legislation to kind of slot in CDR. So one example, compliance markets we already spoke about. The CRCF will essentially be what will be referenced by all the other policies when they are trying to use removals, including the emission trading scheme. So then the second one is national policy. If you're Germany, if you're France, if you're trying to do public procurement, in Europe, you're not going to reinvent the wheel. You're going to reference the CRCF when it comes to what carbon removal to use and how to certify it. And the third one is the VCM. This could be quite immediate, right? But if you know that all of this is coming down the line, and you're a buyer and maybe you don't have all the capacity in the world to do your own research, you might just look at what hundreds of experts have done over several years now and align your purchasing behavior with that. So that's why it's important. And it's been a big success, I think, overall. It's tech neutral, it's stayed open, it provides a good framework for us to use moving forward, but we're far from done, and maybe helpful for people is the timelines, because today it doesn't mean it goes into force today. Like, it will be adopted by the Parliament in April. It will probably it will be implemented at the end of the year, but then it will take another year until the European Commission will have developed the right methodology. So earliest that this actually comes into force is kind of end of 25, early 26, but still huge step in the right direction. If you're interested, check out the blog for more information.
So just a brief follow-up on this, staying with the EU. So a couple of things that came up. The EU Commission recently explained that they would like to create a single market for CDR. What's your perspective and on timing? What do you think about inclusion removals in the EU ETS? What parameters should the Commission set? So very briefly.
Okay, briefly on a very huge topic. So the ETS is the world's largest compliance market. It's actually, I think, 76% of the global compliance market. It's huge. And CDR inclusion would be a complete game changer in terms of amount of demand. And there are two objectives from my perspective, kind of scaling up CDR and compensation of hard to abate emissions, which we will need to address in the ETS. That's what CDR can do. And there's a bunch of options that are currently being discussed of how to do it. Integrate, all removals, some removals with a cap. There's all sorts of different discussions that are happening. There's even discussion of having a dedicated removal trading scheme. So the same as we have with the ETS, but just for removals, which I think would be the preferable choice, but it's quite unlikely. And now with the CRCF, we're probably going to have a link. So only permanent, high quality, durable CDR from the CRCF is likely going to be included. But all of this is for the future. We're going to have a proposal in 2026 by the Commission, and the earliest inclusion of CDR in the ETS would be 2031.
Thanks, Sebastian. Berta, I want to bring you into the discussion. And specifically on the topic of standards, one of the questions that came in the registration asks about standards and methodologies and whether they're going to continue to splinter or join forces in 2024. This participant notes new standards and registries are popping up all the time, claiming to be better than what came before, which can be confusing. So thoughts on the standards and methodologies, and maybe Sebastian, you can also provide perspective on what will happen to standards in Europe when the EU potentially develops its own standard.
Sure. I mean, yes, I can see how having many standards could lead to confusion and fragmentation, but I think in the voluntary market, it's also essential to have several standards. Yeah, each one of them focusing on specific approaches or geographies, and coming up with new innovation, driving the market forward, keeping the momentum going, and in a way driving a race to the top. And I think what is really needed to avoid confusion is to have like clear frameworks that actually assess the quality of the standards and how they operate. So we have ICROA and also ICVCM that can simplify like navigating this market.
Thanks, Berta.
Should I quickly build on
Sebastian, briefly, yes.
Yeah, and very briefly, I mean, the European Commission has now tasked us with essentially figuring out if Europe is going to build its own standards. What we know is they're going to have their own registry, a union registry for carbon removals. And now the discussion is basically, are they going to build detailed standards, or are they going to stay one level higher and more provide guidance on higher level methodologies? That's currently up for debate. And the key factor here is speed. They will have 12 months to do so from December. So realistically, I think that they will have to stay higher level to cover a lot of ground and develop a lot of different methodologies at the same time, instead of kind of replacing what's already being done in the private sector very well.
Great, thank you so much. And Robert, also thank you for answering some of the questions in the Q&A chat. Appreciate that. Nassim, a question for you. How do you see the convergence of voluntary carbon markets, or VCM, within the broader VCM landscape, and what synergies exist with regulatory markets? Also, if you can share any trends that you see and the impact of current legislation on these dynamics.
Sure, and that's true that we are actually witnessing some convergence in the VCM ecosystem, especially when it comes to harmonized standards. Last year especially was an important year when you think about having more clarity and guidelines on the quality of supply by ICVCM, but also credibility of claim by VCMI. However, some of the main challenges remain. Risk of greenwashing accusation probably is one of the biggest barriers for many entering the market, maybe less so for durable CDR, but still the role of carbon credits when it comes to the narrative of if CDR is a way for some to avoid direct abatement is still, especially for hard to abate industries, is still challenging. But despite all these challenges, we're witnessing some growth of regional VCM in developing countries, especially in China, India, Brazil. We've seen some progress, and also integration of VCM credits into compliance markets seems to be like in a growing model, for example, in Singapore and South Korea, Colombia, etc. So when you think about the lack of concrete progress, let's say on Article 6 negotiations during the last COP, it seems that the onus is again back to private sector to take action, while we are waiting for some more consistent, integrated international market. And that essentially could mean the growth of VCM for the time being, as one of the few vehicles really to mobilize funding for CDR projects. Again, as it was mentioned by others, it's great to see more and more recognition of CDR basically, and clarification of its role in the regional or national decarbonization strategies by European Commission. In the US, there's been recently, in recent years, some policy support. So all that said, and I would say the image looks more positive and promising, but at the same time, going back to that recognition and incentive challenge, if that is not addressed soon, it's really hard to imagine that the market could scale at the pace that we need to see in 2030, 2050 onwards.
Thanks, Naseem, and again, highlighting the importance of the incentives. I want to just pick up on something that you mentioned earlier, which actually allows us to look beyond the EU and the US. And there's a question potentially, Robert, that you can comment on, and it's specific to Asia. So what role does Asia play in the global CDR industry in its goal of scaling to meet climate goals, and what needs to happen in the near 1 to 2 years future to enable growth of the Asian CDR market? Robert, is that something you can comment on?
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
I mean, CDR is going to be needed across the world, right? And it's quite dominated by North America and Europe. So we definitely want to see more involvement from other parts of the world. And in Asia, we do have biochar suppliers, and there's some activity in Japan also with more high-tech suppliers. So there's this kind of early stage, but it's definitely far behind US and Europe. And I think it wouldn't surprise me if China became like a powerhouse of CDR as well, exporting it or maybe producing the equipment that's needed at large scale, and sort of bringing down costs that way. But I think the awareness about the sector is lower, and we definitely need more governments and companies to get involved and learn more and sort of enact policies in it.
Great, thank you for that. And Robert, I know you need to leave very soon to join another webinar. So maybe before you do, and we'll continue with another question, if you could just share if there's like one key recommendation or key takeaway for this group coming out of this webinar, what would that be?
I think talking to people that listen now, like do what you can. So if you're working at a company, you can try to convince your own company to get involved at least at some scale. Like some CDR today is much better than none. And I think internal stakeholders matter a lot. Most CDR buyers are probably buyers because some individual within that company really took it upon them to convince the management to do it. So kind of recognizing the role that you have there. And if you're a supplier or involved in another way in the ecosystem, like keep doing what you're doing, but also join CDR4i's portal, help build the data, etc. And yeah, look at what you can do. And the Milky Wire Climate Transformation Fund is also open for any companies that want to help support CDR and solutions. So yeah.
Thank you, Robert. Really appreciate the work that you're doing for the industry at CDR.FYI, and obviously Milky Wire. Appreciate your time today, and have good luck with your next webinar. We'll continue here for another few minutes. Yeah. Naseem,
on the next webinar as well. Maybe you can post the link.
Open Air Collective, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Naseem, just coming back to the something that you talked about earlier in your presentation, which is about these market access models. There's a question, if you could just comment on what you think among these 3 different market access models that you mentioned. Do you have any thoughts on what will become more or less prominent in the next few years?
Sure. Well, from the 3, direct purchase seems to be really specific to those companies with significant budgets and in-house capacity, which is very limited to a few, I would say, the first movers, I would say. So I don't expect that to be like a model that will be picked up by others, but there are others, the 2 that are allowed for medium to small size companies to engage. I think the buyers club and the one-off purchase will be the dominated form of purchasing CDR going forward.
Great, thanks, Naseem. And there's so many fantastic questions in the Q&A and also pre-submitted. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, so we'll begin with a wrap-up here, but we'll use your questions to inform our future webinars. So with that, I want to start first with Sebastian Berta and then come back to Naseem. with your kind of one key takeaway or recommendation for this group based on the discussion today. Sebastian.
Get involved. There's been a lot of companies that already have joined advocacy campaigns. Numbers count. It helps us achieve objectives that help all of us, and you'll learn a lot on the way. So if you're unsure how, follow me. You'll definitely be kept up to date with the next campaigns, and I hope that you can support.
Yes, my key takeaway, I think I emphasize it quite a bit in my section. I would say to promote and put collaboration at the source of everything. This is still a very early market, early space, where many things need to be figured out, and together we can get there much faster. And yeah, I would say that would be my key takeaway.
And for me, I think just reflecting on what everyone said, the bottom line is that science is clear. So the world cannot limit global temperature to 1.5, and now we're talking about 2 now, and maintain that without some degree of durable CDR. So the sooner companies can demonstrate demand, the quicker industry will scale up and the faster price will fall. So the need for ours is really not to wait and see, and now is the time for leadership.
Love that, Nassim. Wait and see is not an option. We need to rapidly innovate, we need to implement, and we need to scale up carbon removal technologies. Couple of calls to action for everyone who wants to continue the conversation and learn more. We have our second annual Carbon Removal Summit this year in London, and focused on engaging specifically corporate sustainability leaders. So join us if you are leading corporate sustainability at any company around the world. And then finally, the next slide, a couple of ways to stay connected, both to the latest insights on the market and also deep dives on specific topics like policy, CDR innovation, and others. And with that, on behalf of Carbon Future, first of all, I want to thank our fantastic group of speakers. Thank you, Nassim, Sebastian, and Berta, and Robert, for sharing your expertise. Thank you to all of you who both contributed the questions prior to the session and during the discussion, and also sharing quite a bit about your work in the chat window. We'll be in touch with the webinar recording and with the links in a follow-up email. Thanks again, and have a good evening or a good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.